The next session will be about a very special publication launch, and now with me in the studio is again Philipp Prein, Head of Communications from the AGORA Verkehrswende. Hello, Philipp. Nice to have you in the studio. It's so nice to have actually face-to-face connections and talks. And Daniel Bongardt, of course, a regular guest here as Program Director, Transport and Climate Change. So, Daniel, I was just telling, it's been about a very special publication launch. I didn't want to tell too much because you know all the details.
Yes, thank you, Kati. And when I first saw this, I said, wow, that's really fascinating to look at it. And yeah, it's a big pleasure for me to welcome you to this session. And I would like to welcome our partners from AGORA Verkehrswende and Ellery Studios today here in this session, because they have put together something special and something inspiring. And later we will also have guests from communication science, from practices in urban mobility, and also from the international sphere. And they will discuss how to innovatively communicate transforming transport in the world. And we as GIZ, we will use this new way, it's a comic as you have seen and spotted already, in our trainings and in our workshops in the coming years. And this is why we together partnered and said we need to have an English version, not only a German version, of the story of a family that is exploring the transformation of the transport sector. And yeah, it's about Germany. It's about the German communication of this, communicating the transport transformation in Germany. But I hope, and this is what I would like to close to, that it inspiring you, the participants from all the different countries and in your sectors and subsectors, that maybe there are even other ways than just the regular reports to incentivize behavioral change and to bring up new ideas of how to change the transport sector. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel. And Philipp, you're also joining us. So what is your look into this new publication?
Yeah, thank you, Kati. Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. And thank you to GIZ for supporting the English edition of our infographic novel and for letting us present it here at the Transport and Climate Change Week. Thank you to the participants who later on will share their thoughts on the issue. And thank you to you, the audience, for joining us. I would like to just briefly point out three issues, three thoughts that may be useful also for the discussion later on. They will touch on the issues of emotion, division, and freedom. First, emotion. Mobility as an everyday practice, as an issue of political debate, has a high emotional quality. People have strong feelings about how they're getting from A to B, and so they also have strong feelings if there are going to be changes in their mobility. Nevertheless, we, AGORA Verkehrswende, a think tank that is focusing on decarbonizing the transport sector, we deal with mobility in a rather sober and scientific way. We try to provide a platform for the dialogue about this complex challenge, especially for politicians and key decision makers in the economy. But we thought at what point, well, why don't we do an experiment for once and try to not only address the minds, but also the emotions of our audience. Try to use the emotional quality of our subject matter as an opportunity to make our communication more attractive within our specialized field, and maybe also to reach a larger group of people. As a partner, we won Ellery Studio, and as a result, we have Future Ahoy, a graphic novel full with scientifically based information. My second point, division. The emotional quality of mobility is also a risk, especially when communication is geared towards marking boundaries and creating division. We experienced this at the moment in Germany in the course of the campaign for the federal election in September. Political parties, of course, try to mobilize their following, and they try to stress how they differ from their opponents. In the case of climate policy, this can be harmful. For example, when a debate touches on CO2 prices, whoever dares to say that CO2 prices will rise is attacked then by others as someone who wants to interfere with people's freedom or who doesn't care for people with low income. With our infographic novel, we try to build bridges rather than stirring up fears and to explain why the changes can be attractive for everyone. But the question remains, how is it possible to have an engaged political debate, but at the same time stick to the facts and don't harm key political instruments that are key to achieving transport transformation? Third, freedom. As the example of CO2 pricing shows, our political debates are often fundamentally framed by the grand narrative of freedom and liberty versus regulation and prohibition on the other side, even though in the end this opposition is false. Transport transformation won't work just with more funding and more attractive services. We also need more measures that push markets and people in the right direction. So what does that mean for our communication? Don't forget the grand narrative, don't lose yourself in factual details, and emphasize that protecting the climate and transforming transport is also about ensuring tomorrow's mobility, about preserving the freedom and the rights of future generations. Exactly this argument was strengthened just a few weeks ago here in Germany by the highest court, the Federal Constitutional Court. And it stated that the state is responsible to protect the climate because otherwise the constitutional liberties and the rights of younger generations will be severely restricted. The perspectives of different generations also play a role in our infographic novel. Plus, our main character, space dog Rudy, is a particular friend of freedom, and he loves always to have a fresh headwind around his nose. So we try with our publication and with our work to show that transforming transport is a way to ensure a promising future. Future Ahoy.
Thank you very much, Philipp, and thanks, Daniel. Thank you very much for these outlines. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're a little bit jealous right now. I have, of course, the edition of Future Ahoy already in my hands, and I do relate with our space dog, Rudy, just here on the cover. And before I speak with the creative director, I just, wanted to show you some wonderful pages. So why do we need sustainable transport? This is really the overall theme and the question. And the publication is actually focusing, as it was just pointed out, in a graphic novel way, but we do hear more about this. So really it tackles the push and the pull factors concerning also different methods and different perspectives when we talk about rural areas. This is also covered in this beautiful publication. As we said, Future Ahoy, and it is, and we're going to dive into that in a moment, really about the communication. How do we actually communicate the topics of the transport and mobility family? And last but not least, I was looking into another very interesting page. Hang on, I find it for you. Yeah, sustainable energy in the transport sector. We talked about that already this morning, but this is actually focusing and going into a deeper way in that as well. Of course, with our space dog. But I just wanted to give you a glimpse and a look into it so that you have an idea of what we are actually right now debating about it and talking about solutions, in fact. So why do we have to talk about Future Ahoy? And why do we need a graphic novel to actually communicate the topics on transport, on mobility, on transport within the framework of climate change? I'm very pleased now to have the designer, the entrepreneur, and the creative strategist with me, the creative director from Ellery Studio, Bernd Riedel. Hi, Bernd. Lovely to have you on board, because I guess you can actually tell me more about the question how communication can contribute to the transport transition and what is needed in order to reach a broader target group on that topic, because sometimes we discuss and debate about this macro levels and we have these high-level panels, and ladies and gentlemen, you can also relate to that, that sometimes we really need to focus on how to communicate our key factors, our key questions, and of course break it down to the answers that actually everybody understands and everybody wants to listen to, and not just some high-level panelists, debating on conferences. No, we need to bring it into the broader audience. So, Bernd Riedel, I would say the stage is all yours, and I can't wait to come in with a discussion. If you have any questions, ladies and gentlemen, to Bernd in a second. He will be there with us for another 10 minutes after his presentation. So please shoot along your questions and be engaged, whatever you want to know from him. Bernd, the stage is all yours. I can't wait.
Absolutely. Thank you for the nice introduction. So, it's my utmost pleasure to give you a peek view into this publication that we did with AGORA Verkehrswende. I will dive a little bit into the background, the backstory of the book, show you some more pages, and I will also talk a little bit about co-creation, a very important ingredient for this piece. But before we dive in, I would like to also tell you a little bit about who am I, who's my team, how does this happen to come into the world like this. Ellery Studio, as mentioned before, thank you for the introduction. We are a creative strategy and research and design studio based here in Berlin. We very much focus on transformation, and we drive that through something in the intersection of innovation, knowledge, and design. As you can see, we are a very young team, young professionals from very different fields. We have future scientists, we have visual designers, workshop moderators, participatory designers, and many more different occupancies. And we do a lot of participatory science communication projects. This is how we met the team of AGORA Verkehrswende. And we clicked right away. We share passions. And this is also exactly how we came together, joined forces to, how AGORA phrased it, do something very, very different with their content. And this is exactly how then Abgefahren came into life. Abgefahren is the German version of the book I'm happy to present today. Future Ahoy is the English title. So as Philipp mentioned before, it's very much based on the contents of this white paper from AGORA Verkehrswende called 12 Insights into the Verkehrswende. One insight that was not yet featured in this publication was how to reach a wider audience with this very specific kind of special knowledge about mobility. Because if you think of it, there's a whole generation now coming of age in these years that showed vividly an interest into these topics. And we should do justice to that, render these white papers accessible, because not everybody has the time, the energy, the motivation to dig into jargon-heavy kind of publications. So we wanted to try to translate it into something very accessible. Like taking these white papers and transforming them into stories. And we do that through storytelling and infographics. Storytelling is basically what you know from a nice campfire evening. You have a series of events and you connect them and you make sense of them through a nice, compelling story. And infographics, you probably know them from PowerPoint presentations. You have bar charts and flow diagrams. But you might also know them from like amazing visual representations of information in magazines and newspapers. In the book, we do storytelling through, just like mentioned before, our main character. It's Rudi the space dog. It's a slightly skeptical wiener dog. We know they usually tend to be a bit more on the conservative side, but he's also an adventurer. He's a traveler and an extreme user of mobility. And he also has an actual real-life counterpart that is not featured in the book, but it is the office dog of AGORA Verkehrswende. So he and his family, they strive through some amazing adventures in the world of mobility, and on the go learn a lot about the background information necessary for a shift to sustainable mobility. And in the book, we introduce this concept of an infographic novel that expands on the traditional concept of a graphic novel by adding lots of information into it and numbers and figures, by marking everything that is an infographic in a bright pink color, while everything else, the thing that carries the information, is the story, which is more in a blue-yellow kind of color scheme. We then take the audience through 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is why we need sustainable transport. Chapter 2 is how it can succeed. And then finally, the last chapter is about how the future could look like for sustainable transport. Of course, we talk a lot about cars. But just as much about bikes and public transport and other modes of transport. We also talk about policy making and city planning, which is a very relevant part, public space. And just to give you an example of the little subplots that we have, imagine just like in the sitcom Friends, a shared flat situation where all the modes of transports live together. You could think the car is a really, really bad roommate. It smokes, it's very loud, and it takes up a lot of space. It has the biggest room, yet it pays the least rent for this public space. This is how the sub-story looks like in the book. And we also talk a lot about other parts of the transition to sustainable mobility, like the transport of goods in cities is very relevant. Just as much, of course, as air travel is an important topic. Now, we got really, really good feedback so far for the presentation, of this book, with getting lots of people into the conversation that might have not picked up on this content otherwise. We even won some really nice awards with it. For example, a gold medal at the Infographic World Awards. And so we're very proud of that, because that was alongside the New York Times and National Geographic magazine. It's we were very proud that we were able to place this kind of content in that category. Now, the best thing about this publication is that it's actually for free to download as a PDF. So I was told it will be provided in the chat function of this. Okay, perfect. So you might want to take a look at that. At the same time, if you're more like me and you really appreciate a physical copy of a book, then you could also head over to shop.ellerystudio.com, where you also see some other publications about sustainability. But there you can purchase a hard copy of the book if the PDF is not enough for you. Now, before I head back over and to our fantastic panelists, there's one more thing I have to share, which is a message from Rudy. Rudy, the office dog of Agora, and he wants me to tell you, bork, bork, bork. He said you would know what it means, so I'll just leave it at that. And with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Bernd. Thank you very much for bringing Rudy, of course, into our studio. Tell us, why did you start up with a dog? I mean, it could be an office cat as well.
Well, it could have been a cat as well, but Rudy was a very good fit. First of all, he's super cute. And,
of course, every dog is, of course.
Yeah, and very excited about mobility topics, of course. But the thing that really made us look into that is it makes it interesting. A space dog is just inherently in itself an interesting story. So we expanded on that.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions to Bernd, Bernd. Post them please on the chat. The chat is still open for you. I do have some questions, Bernd, because of course when we talk about graphic novel, it is a very, I would say, a modern way of communicating, a very difficult, or not a difficult, but a very big and broad topic. So how did you keep the balance of breaking details down without losing or oversimplifying facts and figures?
Well, we've assembled a team, of course, mixed of designers from our side, and then, of course, scientists and researchers from AGORA Verkehrswende to really flesh that out, like to really see with like a quality control, kind of content quality control system, to see that we never go into the mundane, into the like too generalized area, but at the same time also keep it really fresh and crisp. So to not overload with something, what we call in infographics, cognitive overload, to not ask too much of the audience. So hitting that balance was absolutely a team effort.
Can you take us with you into some of the debates where, the hot debates were actually taking place of somebody who's really who has a big love for facts and figures and analytic, and of course the creative scene, the artists, that want to work with colors and a lot of graphics. So, what were the difficult topics actually to find a common ground on?
Like how I remember, there was not a single difficult problem there. I remember pitching that idea to Agora, even though they said they want something crazy. I was still considering it might also just not be appropriate. That's always the question if you try something new. But I remember vividly the first presentation we had, and we pitched the idea, and Christian from AGORA Verkehrswende, the director, he was like, sold.
Deal, done. That's an easy pitch, right?
Yeah, doesn't happen that often.
No, that doesn't happen. So really the question is, because I think a lot of sectors are actually now listening, and they ask all over the globe, okay, how can we communicate our topics in a way that reaches to a broad audience? So Bernd, do we need more courage in the way of communicating? Like, this is one example, of course, showing that is one method of putting everything together in a graphic novel. Would you say we need more courage within the very theoretical fields? Do we need to be more bold in what we actually want to achieve, and do we need to try out more when we talk about communication methods?
Bold is a very good keyword. I would say courage. There's a lot of courage. Like I work a lot with people from renewable energy, from sustainable transport, and courage is the thing that is always there. Like it's always very, very fascinating and motivating to work in that field. So the boldness, yes, but I would say there's a lot of instances now, especially with new modes of communication around, with the internet being completely diffused into society. It's like a very open playing ground that you can have fun with and enjoy just as much as we all enjoy the topic we work on with sustainability.
Graphic novel now on paper or in pixel, depending on if you download it. But really the question is, is this the right path? I don't want to disturb the idea now, but is this the right path? Because social media is really hitting the ground with TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all these different channels. These short little video snippets are really the trend of communicating also last bits and pieces, and very interesting bits and pieces. So is this not the other way around, of focusing on a whole book to create? Do you think it's the right path, or should we also keep the balance between both these little video snippets, the info snippets, and of course, ideas like the graphic novel, or should we focus rather on one thing?
Well, I can't speak about if it's the right path. It is definitely one path that can be taken. In my experience, the thing that really is exciting to work with is a lightheartedness, like an openness of mind to approach these very heavy topics, because they are frustrating enough to see. I mean, today is a good example in Berlin. It breaks all heat records. And so it is a very saddening kind of a reality that we are facing with these global challenges. So it might be refreshing to see once in a while a lighthearted approach to that topic that does justice to the gravity of it, but at the same time time also is very enjoyable. Why not both?
Why not both? That's a good question. Absolutely, Bernd. Bernd, a question also, for who are you actually writing this book, or for who are you actually designing the book when you sit on your desk? Who do you have as a reader in your mind? Is it somebody just going to school? Is it to be read in a classroom? Or do you see that book also used in offices, in high-level meeting rounds? Where do you see that book when you actually imagine of creating this book and, of course, going through the graphic novel? Who's having that book in his or her hands?
Well, we collected a whole bunch of very, very lovely experiences with it. First of all, we didn't have any specific audience in mind because I think, as you said before, who can't enjoy a cute dog, right? So. Good experiences we make, of course, with the demographic that I had in my presentation, Fridays for Future. This kind of generation is much easier to approach with a format like that. Then, of course, it looks very good on the coffee table of any sustainability office or company, just as much as, and that's a very personal experience for me with the book, it's a great door opener into conversations. Like when you are at the conference and you want to get in contact with and that actually happened with this and with similar publications that we did. If you want to get in contact with a minister or even Angela Merkel, that is easier to approach these people with something impressive and beautiful, and you instantly have a door opener to say like, okay, I have a little word with you just for this beautiful thing. Yeah.
Everybody loves good design too. Yeah. It is a door opener, absolutely. Have you tried it out? Have you had a conversation with somebody that you actually shown that book and that you were actually now opening a door to?
Opening a door to? Well, this is honestly exactly how this book came into life. We did not really comparable, similar publication about the Energiewende. It was a coloring book, and this is exactly how AGORA Verkehrswende got into contact with us and said, like, let's do more of that. That's fun. Let's try it out, because we need more stuff on more channels to reach as many people as possible.
Do you think it's something unique to create something like that, or is it already a trend to go on a designing way and path of communicating? Or is this still pretty new within the business to create something that actually looks really good? I mean, I can imagine that book on a coffee table in a cafe, in a sustainable cafe or in a cafeteria, It's really an eye-opener, as you mentioned. But would you say there is already plenty on the side as well in that style? Or is this something that pioneers also the way straight ahead into the communication of the future?
Well, you can see all kinds of fantastic projects in this environment. So it's definitely not something that we completely invented just out of the blue. What makes this one special, I would say, is that it's extremely content heavy. There's a lot of information in there from people who usually write white papers and reports and so on. This is not something that you see very often, but there are definitely some fantastic graphic novels out there with scientific content.
Absolutely. I have questions from the chat, so ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for participating. Laura Lopez is asking, are you planning to translate it to other languages? In Spanish would be great, for example. German and English, right? That's available already. But what about other languages?
Well, that's something we would have to talk to the GIZ about, because they supported us graciously in making the English version happen. And if I remember right, there was even the idea floating around to translate it into Spanish. But I don't know.
Nice
no promises set.
Yes, we keep that already in our mind. Another question coming up. Of course, the infographic novel is a fun format and a very good-looking format, as I can add. I'm wondering if there is another innovative format of communication, like a theater play or telenovelas for public education. So when we talk, when we brainstorm a little bit, besides the graphic novel, what else comes to your mind?
Absolutely. There's a ton of things you can do. Just everything that is enjoyable, you can combine in some sort with a good cause. For example, you can make festivals, you can do lots of participatory art, like community work, where you involve actual members of a neighborhood and create things, create stories, create things to share, because that's how the communication nowadays work, right? With social media, the decentralized distribution of knowledge is gaining more and more power. So this is definitely something that can be pursued.
Do you think it's more coming up now until, or when we look over into the post-pandemic times? Because of course the pandemic put a break on a lot of projects, a lot of face-to-face contacts, a lot of exchange that comes from gathering and from coming together. So where do you see that trend of communication when we look ahead into a year or two? Does it stay that way, or does it actually improve? Does it go further?
Well, of course, digital formats are now more than ever really important for any communication purpose. And while it was a very straining situation over the last 1.5 years for everyone, for everybody, it opened at the same time a lot of opportunities, especially in the digital world, because we had to very quickly get accustomed to new forms of togetherness. And so while we might have been restrained to our apartments the last 1.5 years, somehow the world opened up to us through like
and
digital.
we're ready for stories again, right?
Yeah,
As I
exactly.
understand. We are so ready for more stories.
Something has to fill the void. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bernd Riedel, a designer, an entrepreneur, a creative strategist, and of course, creative director at Ellery Studio. Thanks for joining us, Bernd.
Thanks
Stay
for
with
having
me in the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to come now to the word cloud that I promised you earlier to understand more about what's driving you, right? In which field are you currently working on? Please find the poll now, and I do have a look into our poll as well to understand more what is your favorite passion. I think I need new glasses. No, I do read sustainable urban mobility, transportation, climate change, public space mobility plans, active mobility, road safety. I'm just, picking out a few for you now, but you're going to see it in the chat as well. NGO work, international development, e-bus systems, so geography, this is close to my heart, auto transport federal, sustainable transport advocacy, cities and climate change with transport, focus sustainable transport. So I see a lot of fields that you are actually engaged in. Thanks again for joining us and, for bringing all these different perspectives, of course, together in our Transport and Climate Change Week. Wonderful. Heading over now, we just discussed about new communication ways and methods and, of course, the new trends, how to communicate to a broader audience. I'd like to welcome now our panel for our next little debate. Laura Ballesteros is with us, Global Secretary and founder of Women in Motion and former Planning Undersecretary at the Secretariat of Mobility. Laura, I hope you can hear me well, and I hope you're with us, and also in the live stream. Oh, wonderful. Okay, the whole round. Thank you very much. So, Laura, I can see you. I come back to you in a second. Great to have you. Maruxa is with us again. Maruxa Cardama, Secretary General of SLOCAT. Nice to see you again. We already listened to a very passionate keynote from you. And last but not least, Javier Errea, CEO at the Errea Communication Design and Communication Studio. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome from Berlin into the world, wherever you are based. Great to have you on board on our climate and on our Transport and Climate Change Conference 2021. Laura, I'd like to start with you. You've been the Undersecretary for Mobility in Mexico City. When it comes to communication, a transformation of transport in a city, what are your experiences so far? Laura, I hope you can hear me well, and what are your experiences? Can you give us a glimpse? What are your experiences on what it needs to communicate a transformation of transport in a city? How do you engage everybody?
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas tardes. Allá, muy buenos días en América Latina. Espero me puedan escuchar, si no, por favor, háganme alguna señal. Tengo un poco de delay por la transmisión. creo que es normal. Bueno, pues sí, efectivamente, hace unos años me tocó encabezar el nuevo modelo de movilidad en la Ciudad de México, que ha sido una de las batallas más importantes que hemos dado en materia de movilidad sustentable, no solo porque el reto era continuar lo que se estaba haciendo bien en materia de movilidad, sin que hubiera todavía un sector configurado para que se encabezara desde la movilidad sustentable, desde la visión del peatón, desde la visión de la seguridad vial, desde la visión que integrara a todas las agendas de transporte bajo una sola entidad, en este caso la Secretaría de Movilidad, sino también porque había que generar disrupción, había que generar toda una narrativa de innovación que explicara por qué era necesario entrar a un nuevo modelo de movilidad en la Ciudad de México. Una ciudad que además ustedes sabrán, es una ciudad que se caracteriza por la cantidad de autos que se mueven todos los días, por el tamaño de urbe. Somos una mega ciudad, somos la quinta ciudad más grande del mundo, comparada en América Latina únicamente con Sao Paulo y en el mundo únicamente con Beijing en China o con Nueva Delhi en India. En esa dimensión de ciudad, donde suceden todos los días 30 millones de viajes metropolitanos, era necesario comunicar por qué era importante entrar a un nuevo modelo en donde el peatón fuera la prioridad, fuera el centro de la infraestructura, por el centro de la visión estratégica, por el centro de la inversión, por el centro también de las políticas públicas y con ello toda la lógica que el gobierno y que la regulación trae consigo. La gente está muy acostumbrada a pensar en coches, aun cuando no tienen uno. El reparto modal de la Ciudad de México es sin duda también una cosa a observarse. Más del 65% de la población no se mueve en automóvil. Esto quiere decir que son usuarios de otros modos, entre ellos transporte público y caminata. 45% se mueven en transporte público y casi 30% caminando. Y ahí es donde estaba la clave comunicar. Fue muy complicado. Uno de los grandes retos que tuvimos fue justo la creación de infraestructura segura para peatones, para ciclistas y también la generación de medidas de seguridad vial para salvar vidas, para prevenir muertes, que es una también de las grandes pandemias que en América Latina tenemos que trabajar. Nada más, y creo que con esto podemos dar una primera idea de lo dificultoso que fue comunicar, aun cuando nos dimos a la tarea de hacerlo de manera muy clara, que incluso el gobierno perdió casi 30 puntos de popularidad cuando empezamos medidas de movilidad sustentable y de disminución de velocidades máximas en las calles.
We try to reduce speed in the cities, but it's important for safety.
Thank you so much. I was just listening to the last bits and pieces from you, Laura, from the interpreter. So sorry for taking a little bit more time. Thank you again for your insights, Laura. Maruxa, I'd like to come to you now, because when we talk about communication, you are working with international institutions, NGOs, different companies, and all different aspects. How do you approach communication of sustainable transport to a community that is, of course, a non-expert community? So how do you reach actually everybody on the ground, on the street, to really focus and be engaged in sustainable transport?
Thanks very much. And it's lovely to be here again, second time of the day, and to see again Laura and to meet Javier. Un placer estar con ustedes de nuevo. A few things. I mean, it's been so impressive, by the way, the comic. I mean, great congratulations, absolutely, to our colleagues from the Ellery Studio, from AGORA and from GIZ. I also want to have a Rudy in my life, as somebody who's absolutely passionate for dogs. But to your question, well, we try to do it, if you want, using 6 entry points to some extent. The first one is about trying to overcome language as a barrier. Unfortunately, in the international arena, English dominates, and many times you have to find another lingua franca, and of course, make an effort to go beyond English. A second entry point for us is very much about making all conversations about transport and mobility a people-centered conversation, a conversation that is about access to social and economic opportunity, which at the end of the day is what transport is all about. A third entry point for us in that effort of trying to communicate to a non-transport expert audience is also placing transport at the center of that social and economic change, the change of these social and economic systems that our societies are going to have to go through in order to be more equitable and to be more climate friendly. And that allows us to connect transport to aspects such as livelihoods, social cohesion, gender, the intergenerational solidarity that was mentioned in the previous sessions as well, the health, the well-being, all those aspects that are so very essential. A fourth entry point for us is very much about reminding us all that transport, the demand for transport, is an induced demand. It's not going to be just transport engineers or just transport departments in a city or in a government that are going to manage transport demand. There's going to be aspects related to fiscality, the fiscal systems in a country or the fiscal systems that a city can actually enable. There's going to be aspects related to personal choices, to behavioral patterns that are going to be essential in shaping that demand for transport. And demand is associated to the emissions, to the impact on the climate, and it's associated as well to the different modes of transport that are put in place in order for everybody to have equitable access to mobility. A fifth entry point for us is trying to be as context as specific as possible. Not go with that solution, with one size fits all. That will never really do it when you work at an international level. You can agglomerate trends, you can agglomerate findings, but it is essential to really then be as context as specific as possible to try to identify what can be replicated and scaled up across different geographies, and certainly to try to be also cost efficient, to try to tell decision makers what is going to give them the best benefit in many different fronts: transport emissions, accessibility to mobility, and job generation for every single dollar they could be spending on transport and mobility. And last but not least is perhaps about managing a notion about data that is not the same notion as academic data, the data that academia manages, but it's more data for decision makers, is making those translations, those visualizations that are both qualitative and quantitative, and that hopefully could give enough arguments to somebody like Laura, for instance, when they are trying to completely change the paradigm of mobility of a city and make it very much about people at the center and equitable access. So that's very much the 6 entry points, if you may, that we try to use when we try to communicate at this international level. And part of what we have tried to achieve with the second edition of the Slow Cut Transport and Climate Change Status Report that we had the privilege of launching earlier this morning, and your able moderation. So back to you at the studio again. Thank you.
Thank you, Maruxa. And as I see again, data, the connection of data is really close to your heart. So thanks for underlining this point again. Javier, coming back to you, Javier Errea, CEO of the Errea Communicative Design and Communication Studios. When we talk about transformation of transport and transforming the transport, of course, and that was a topic that we tackled in the previous sessions, also our travel behavior has to change. But how do we communicate this behavioral change, and what is the perspective of research and practice on design? What would you say on that, Javier?
Hi, hello. It's an honor to be invited and participate in this event. I live in a medium-sized city here in Spain, Pamplona. You cannot compare to Berlin or, of course, not to say Mexico City, which is a monster compared to my city. But what I can say is we are living a very deep transformation in mobility, as anyone. Speed regulation, new tracks, new spaces for cycling, sidewalks for people, new public transport routines and routes. But my concern is that authorities all the time insist on traditional advertising campaigns much more than in new narratives. I'm a journalist. I'm a designer as well. I know very well Bernd and Ellery Studio. I'm impressed by the work, not just this last graphic novel, but also the energy book they created before. So, in my opinion, communication is crucial for being successful in this challenge we are facing nowadays. Some kind of language gap is missing in the way public authorities normally address people. They use cliches, and in my opinion, they try citizens like childs. It's some kind of child teaching instead of treating us like adults. So my perception as a journalist and designer is that people need an adult way of being communicated all these changes and transformations. So, trying to answer your question, one of the risks, in my opinion, is a trivialization. And the way I would try to approach the communication of these changes is first activism, maybe activism, but also participation. I mean, people need to feel that they are useful in the conversation, and that the conclusions of these conversations are put into these new narratives to be treated and well designed. So this could be my first answer to your question.
Thank you, Javier. I just have an add-on question for understanding. When you talk about creating a higher participation and, of course, a new form of communication, would you also agree, you with a background as a journalist and, of course, with your design background, would you rather also say that we need new forms of translations of these very detailed topics? Is it a form of a new translation when we communicate in new formats and in new methods?
Yeah. New languages, visual languages. That I don't know if I understand what you mean. I mean by translation. For instance, the graphic novel that Bernd presented is a new language, a new way to be accurate, but also keep some fun, to keep close to people. And this visual novel is a fantastic way to be close to people, to make people think and feel that they are important, that behind data there is always people, real people, and this is crucial for me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Javier. I'd like to make a little quick reality check with Laura from Mexico. Laura, when we talk about a graphic novel, for example, and these new languages, so to say, as Javier just pointed out, would an infographic like the future Ahoy we've just pointed out, would work in Mexico City?
Ich bin jetzt wieder auf der Plattform, also in dem Browser, wo ich den Livestream
angucken kann. Who can use such products like the future Ahoy? I hope you can hear me well. I just have a frozen image from you right now. But Laura, can you just give me a glimpse, a quick buenos dias, that you can hear me well? I think we lost her connection. Okay, we're going into that again. Maruxa, heading the question back to you. When we talk about these new languages of translations, would you agree with Javier that we need these new languages, or are they really integrating everybody on board, and is everybody involved with these new languages? Because with every new language we have to understand and we have to get the translations right. So how do you actually keep it right that everybody is on board with these new methods of communication?
Well, I think Javier has very much hit the nail on the head. And I think it links very well with what Philipp was telling us at the beginning. He mentioned 3 words: vision, emotion, division. And I think that perhaps the 3 can actually be linked to what Javier was saying, but I could particularly link emotion. I think that data is almost worth nothing in policymaking if you really cannot translate it into visualization of what does it mean to the average person on the street, to each of us as citizens, to us as mothers, as daughters, as siblings, as grandparents, as providers of services, and as people who really need to make a living, isn't it, on a day-to-day. So I think that element of storytelling is very important. And I think that what we are into right now is very much about creating common currency, creating a lingua franca that could hopefully go beyond the language barriers, the fact that not everybody speaks English at the same level of fluency, across the world. And we have the beauty of many different languages across the world. And we also have cultural elements. So I think that new currencies, those new lingua francas, the visualization in storytelling allows us to go beyond barriers and to also bring the cultural factor that is so essential to the paradigm shift, to the behavioral change that we want to empower and enable in different places, depending on their context. I hope I'm giving you a bit of an answer. I think that Laura would have been so perfectly placed, to give us a bit of her opinion on this. And of course, I could never, match the level of experience she's got herself in a city like Mexico. But that would be my my 2 cents.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Maruxa. Laura, let's have a look into your perspective coming from Mexico City. So something like the future Ahoy novel graphic, would that actually work? And is it possible to use these products? Laura, what is your reality check on these new lingua francas, in these new translations, in these new terms of translations?
Definitivamente sí, es un hecho y estoy completamente de acuerdo con lo que se ha dicho aquí acerca de lo importante que es comunicar de manera diferente, porque queremos llegar a públicos diferentes. No solamente se trata de hablar entre los mismos de siempre, de los famosos usual suspects, para decirnos lo mismo que ya sabemos, aplaudirnos además lo que ya sabemos que nos vamos a aplaudir, o cuestionar lo que ya sabemos que se va a cuestionar. Ese ha sido el error de comunicación que ha tenido la Agenda de Movilidad Sustentable y de Seguridad Vial a lo largo de los años en las ciudades. A las personas de carne y hueso que todos los días hacen viajes, que todos los días incluso arriesgan la vida para llegar vivas y sin lesiones a sus destinos, que tienen sistemas de transporte público indignos en muchas zonas de América Latina, de África, de Asia, incluso también en algunas zonas de Europa o de América del Norte. Queremos llegar a estas personas, a estos niños, a estas madres de familia, a estos jóvenes que están buscando cambiar el mundo y que hay una manera muy clara de ofrecerles esta vía de transformación y de lucha a través del nivel de calle, esta lucha callejera para transformar nuestras ciudades. Yo creo que también el lenguaje del cómic ayuda muchísimo, no solo en esta lógica, sino en muchas en materia de comunicación. Es una manera muy franca, muy clara de decir cosas y sobre todo muy popular. El público latinoamericano está muy familiarizado con la lectura del cómic. Hay grandes artistas, escritores que se han dedicado al trabajo literario a través del cómic y hay una gran formación de cultura a través del mismo. Así que, ¿por qué no? ¿Por qué no atrevernos a través de él a generar este cambio cultural en materia de movilidad? Incluso en el Programa Integral de Movilidad de la Ciudad de México en su momento hubo un pilar dedicado al cambio cultural y ahí los elementos de comunicación eran básicos. ¿Por qué no logramos comunicar bien? Bueno, primero porque se hacen esfuerzos muy tradicionales y segundo porque no se pone presupuesto en esto tampoco. Se genera muchísima subestimación de la fuerza y de transformación que tiene el lenguaje y la comunicación en nuestra materia.
We don't see the importance of the language for transformation and for a disruptive process.
So now we've got the translation as well. Thank you, Laura. Javier, I'd like to come in with you because when we talk about different languages now, of course, we need to also tackle the question of how to bring everybody together, all the stakeholders. So what is needed when we say we need to have better bridges between science experts and the general public? What are your to-dos that you see? What are the priorities that you'd like to tackle on and that you see a focus on?
That I agree with my two colleagues, and especially when we talk about emotion. Trying to find breaches. Ways to connect each other, the stakeholders involved in this transformation. Emotion is a must. New narratives have to be connected with emotion, and of course with understanding. It would be a nonsense if we create new narratives and new languages and people do not understand. So we need a basics, some kind of basics we all share and to be connected. Focusing on data, on infographics, that is a fascinating language. I'm specialized, and I have to say that one of my big concerns regarding data is that the overwhelming amount of information we can deal with. So that if we insist on that kind of overwhelming data visualizations, we will be doing a bad job for our people and for our goals. So clarity, simplicity, and emotion are keys to better use these infographics or data languages. I have a colleague based in New York. He's an Italian well-known designer, Giorgia Lupi. She usually speaks about data humanism, and for me, I mean, all the time I keep this idea in mind. I mean, to remember that people are living behind data. It's not just numbers, statistics, real cold, distant graphics. It is people. It is people all the time. That's why the comic, for instance, is a very useful language because it is easily understandable. But not just the comic. We can use graphics. I mean, these abstract diagrams. But our challenge is to make these diagrams really understandable. And I remember an exhibition we produced here in my city for a public institution, talking about our habits, our traditions, our climate data, I mean, routines, transport. You cannot imagine how much we gather people in this old town building, and through these panels, this data, we created a very interesting conversation. And it was a marvelous and surprising way to realize that people started talking about how to interact, how to participate. And it was through graphics, which is amazing. So in conclusion, I would say that this kind of clear and emotional infographics can create a fantastic bridge to go through.
Thank you, Javier. And I did note clarity, simplicity, and emotions as some keynotes you remember. And of course, what you just pointed out, people are interested in people's story. That's why I'd like to come back to Maruxa. Maruxa, Slowcat's work is focusing on developing countries when we talk about the global south. And many people, of course, still dream of having a car, especially when we look in rising population regions with a higher or with a rising middle class. Of course, consumerism is rising, but how do we communicate in that regard and in that socioeconomic spheres a more sustainable way to travel when we look into, of course, a rising middle class, when we look, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, where middle class is rising. And of course, a car or having a car or traveling by car is also a momentum of status. So how do we communicate in these different socioeconomic perspectives? Maruxa.
Thanks for the question. I mean, it's a great one, and it's one that could benefit a lot from mixing as well social sciences, isn't it, in this conversation? Having a few of the great psychologists we had earlier in the day to bring us a bit of their wisdom there. I think that something that we could do is also learn from the automotive industry. You know, the car industry has been exceptional over the past decades at selling not just a product, but also a lifestyle. So a lot of what we are facing is a conversation about lifestyles. And I think that should never, is something we should not lose track of. And linking to the point Javier was making about the infantilization of people, I think that if we really try to understand as a society, the society-wide impacts that those super big, super high motorization rates of the past century have had on pollution, on road crashes, on congestion and loss of productivity, on lack of equitable access to mobility, we could be starting to unpack a bit the story behind what it means to sell just the image of cars as the only access to mobility. I think that what we're going to need as well is to really invest a lot of human capital and a lot of financial investment in facilitating and enabling multi-stakeholder processes in which, on the basis of those emotions, of that storytelling, we could be rewriting the notion of freedom, if you want, that the lifestyle attached to a car has been given us over the past century, and think, what notions of freedom can we actually relate to less dependent car-dependent lifestyles in the next few years? Important to that, I think, is going to be as well to help the decision makers visualize and to help us as citizens visualize what are the measures that we can take, each of us, both for passenger transport and for freight transport. And there is this very, if you want, geeky terminology we use in the transport community that talks about avoiding unnecessary motorized trips, shifting to less carbon intense modes, and improving transport modes. But if we translate it at the end of the day, it will be about giving people options not to take a car, preserving in many places in the global south the opportunity to walk and to cycle and do it safely. So bring up to scale the infrastructure investments. Make sure that in every city of the global south, there is a public transport system that could be at the core of an equitable mobility system. And actually using the huge push towards electrification, towards e-mobility, to think about how do we put e-bikes, e-scooters, e-cargo bikes, e-vans, e-buses at the service of people and at the service of this notion of intermodality. So it's very much going to be about narratives that help us dismantle the notion that a society cannot grow economically if it's not decoupled from private motorization. Thank you.
Thank you, Maruxa. And the point that you were just raising up, selling lifestyles instead of selling products, will be very interesting, I think, for a car nation like Germany, actually, when we debate about the future of this lifestyle. I'd like to have a look into the chat. To Javier, there's a question from the chat. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for your active engagement. What are common communication mistakes that you wish public authorities would stop? Javier.
What a question.
What are common communication mistakes that you wish public authorities would stop?
What a question. I was trying to point out before the thing that in many occasions public authorities, policymakers are focused on just their own campaigns and trying to use a very traditional way of connecting people, and they don't realize that people, especially young people, and are a little bit tired about this traditional approach to communication. I mean, people are waiting for data shining. I mean, if you find 2, 3, 4 statistics, no more than that, but really clear, understandable, connecting, I mean, that's it. And people, what people are waiting, in my opinion, is some kind of courage from the authorities. I mean, the authorities tend to think that people do not want risks. It's the same with journalism. I mean, I've been working for many newspapers in my career, and all the time we think, or we excuse us saying that, oh no, readers will not accept this kind of risks, and it's just the contrary. I mean, that's why Bernd and Ellery Studio, they are trying a new way to tell the story about public transportation. But it is the same with everything. I mean, what kind of new languages, emotional languages, clear languages, visual, of course, languages are people expecting from us? Try to think that people are all the time connected to their mobiles, social media, so they are very used to visual appeals, very strong, very impact oriented, and in my opinion, this is what public authorities should try with no fear.
I'd like to come in with Laura now when we talk about really being engaged and ready for change and keeping the hope of change and not losing the faith in change. Laura, from your perspective in Mexico, how would you say, are we going, or is the city of Mexico going back to an old normal, or is it really actually staying on that path of a change towards a green transportation and mobility system? So how would you see, is there enough courage within the inhabitants, but also, of course, within the administration of the city of Mexico to really go forward?
Mira, la verdad, esta es una muy buena pregunta, porque justamente la voluntad política es lo que siempre se interpone con las medidas de transformación, no solo en materia de movilidad, sino en las agendas disruptivas que las ciudades necesitan. Y en materia de movilidad específicamente, cuando estamos hablando de proyectos de transporte, son proyectos de largo plazo. Construir un metro en las ciudades, construir líneas de metrobús, generar infraestructura a nivel de calles completas y compartidas, universales para todos, son inversiones que requieren una planificación y un esfuerzo presupuestal de largo plazo. Y cuando las administraciones cambian cada 6 años, no hay reelección de los alcaldes, vienen también los péndulos políticos de tomas de decisiones ideológicas, esto complica mucho la transformación y complica la continuidad. Actualmente la Ciudad de México se encuentra justo en un péndulo distinto, ideológico, al que se encontraba en tiempos pasados, y hay mucha resistencia a continuar con el cambio. Sin embargo, La pandemia ha hecho que las autoridades reaccionen ante la movilidad no motorizada de una manera positiva como una respuesta a los cambios que nos está trayendo la movilidad con COVID-19. Así que esto fue una buena noticia para la Ciudad de México, para varias ciudades mexicanas que se atrevieron a hacer ciclovías emergentes, por ejemplo, y lograron empezar a generar calles peatonales, la apropiación de espacio público para actividades económicas, justamente como medidas ante la pandemia. Entonces, yo te diría que independientemente de los cambios de administración, independientemente de lo que sucedió con la pandemia, trajo buenas noticias para las ciudades mexicanas. ¿Y qué sucede como siguientes pasos? Pues claro que se requiere que la gente y la sociedad civil organizada, los colectivos, los activistas, comiencen a exigir todavía con más fuerza estos cambios. Ellos son siempre los que van un paso adelante y los que han logrado que las cosas se hagan.
For change, and we hope, and I hope, we can discuss this further on a different on a different momentum, or maybe on the next Transport and Climate Change Week at the conference 2022. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to Maruxa Cardama, Javier Errea, and Laura Ballesteros for joining us on the conference, again for giving your insights. Really, really interesting, and I think this topic will be with us about communication, because it's all about emotions, it's all about people, and it's all about translation of our details and facts and figures. Thanks everybody for being involved in that beautiful panel, and I hope to see you soon. Stay healthy wherever you are.